Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 13th of April 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Apologies for the brief hiatus there. We don't think it was anything untoward. We don't think it was the Russians. Your host today, Mike Robinson, Brian Gerrish, and we are joined by David Scott. And David, of course, reporting from north of the border with Northern Exposure. Do we live in a democracy, Mike?
No, we don't, but we'll talk about that in a second. Obviously, there was a cabinet meeting yesterday to discuss whether we were going to take action for Syria, and they released a statement. They said the cabinet met and received an update on the attack against innocent civilians in Douma, Syria on Saturday. The Prime Minister said it was a shocking and barbaric act which killed up to 75 people, including children, in the most appalling and inhumane way. Cabinet agreed that the Assad regime has a track record of use of chemical weapons, and it is highly likely that the regime is responsible for Saturday's attack. The Prime Minister said it was a further example of the erosion of international law. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. And it went on to say, in relation to the use of chemical weapons, which is deeply concerning to us all, following a discussion in which every member present made a contribution, Cabinet agreed it was vital to use that the use of chemical weapons did not go unchallenged. Cabinet agreed on the need to take action to alleviate humanitarian distress and to deter the further use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime. Cabinet agreed the Prime Minister should continue to work with allies in the United States and France to coordinate an international response. So on screen, I've paraphrased that. I said that Theresa May had said we agreed I should continue to sideline Parliament and work with foreign powers to coordinate an international response. Well, of course, the power to commit troops to some kind of armed conflict, to war, is royal prerogative. It doesn't require Parliament constitutionally, but it sort of highlights this whole situation highlights the pretty ridiculous constitutional situation that we're in at the moment. So these are powers that are derived from the Crown rather than from Parliament. There's no codified parliamentary procedure at the moment as to what to do. So since 2003, well, since 2006 anyway, the government has usually asked Parliament. They've had a debate. They've had a vote. But as I say, if I could bring David into the programme at this point, this does reflect the pretty ridiculous constitutional position that we're in at the moment, where the government claims that we live in or that we have parliamentary sovereignty, but only when it suits the government. When it suits the government to maintain this veneer of democracy, we shout parliamentary sovereignty, but when it suits them to just go ahead and do whatever the heck they like, they shout royal prerogative. Right. Sorry, we're not hearing you, David. Okay, well, we'll have to move on while David tries to get that sorted out.
Well, I'll just comment on this one while we're just seeing whether David can get himself back online with us. Of course, the other thing we've got to remind people of, Mike, is that the Queen accepted mediatisation. She gave her powers away in order to keep all of the money and the privilege. So what is the Crown? What is the power of the Privy Council? Because the Privy Council is now starting to be mentioned in the decision-making process with regard to Syria. So what sort of country are we in? Mr. Burko, as Speaker, was asked by Justin Walker of the British Constitution Group a few weeks ago whether we lived in a country ruled by common law. He said he didn't know, and that we should speak to that Justin Walker should speak to a solicitor. So we're in a fantastic position at the moment.
In the meantime, speaking on the issue of what's legal and what isn't, Consortium News yesterday published a statement from international lawyers. Strike against Syria would be illegal. And this statement says that the power to commit troops to armed... sorry, I do apologise, that's the wrong one. That unless conducted in self-defence or with United Nations Security Council approval, that any attempt to strike against Syria would violate international law, that it would amount to the crime of aggression, the supreme international crime which carries with it the evil of every other international crime, as noted by the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg in 1946, they said in this statement. Accordingly, we urge the United States and its allies to refrain from illegal conduct against Syria, They say that the United States arming of insurgents to overthrow the government of Syria is already illegal under international law, and they say that our point is a simple one. The only way to resolve the Syrian crisis is through commitment to well-settled principles of international legal norms. And this statement was signed by former US Attorney General Ramsey Clark, former National Lawyers Guild President Marjorie Cohn, Executive Director of Just Atonement, which is a legal NGO, Jean Mirror, President of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, Dr. Curtis Dubler, and UN Representative Internationallawyers.org, Abdeen Jabara, and so it goes on. So there's a whole list of these international lawyers have signed this statement. So the question comes down to, is this a legal action, even if it could be demonstrated that Syria had committed this alleged act, which of course there is no such proof for. And in fact, Sergei Lavrov in a defense briefing or in a foreign ministry briefing this morning said that he has indisputable evidence that the attack was staged as part of what he described a Russophobic campaign by one country, which he has not named at this point. But of course, we all know who he's talking about. That's us. I
would imagine he's talking about the United Kingdom, and we'll remind people again that it was the BBC's own charity, in inverted commas, BBC Media Action, that posted an article in which it boasts that executives of BBC Media Action had worked within Syria with those who were agitating against the Assad regime. So we have a BBC charity boasting of its ability to conduct subversion within another nation state. And that ties in, of course, with the BBC working originally in Kazakhstan to overturn the structure of that country as well. So highly likely it's us, to use that wonderful expression, Mike.
Now the question is there any public support for this? And well, I'm showing this particular tweet from Alex Thompson, who was on the programme yesterday, but there are a whole range of similar...
I've got a few more actually, because they're so good.
Yeah. Yes, okay. So we'll see a couple more later on. But this one says, one of the most effective strategies in war is to gas your own citizens when you're winning, so that the United States destroys you. And Alex has put that on an image of Napoleon. Apparently, a number of people perhaps thought that Alex was suggesting that this was a genuine quote, which of course he wasn't. But nonetheless, we've seen a whole range of these tweets going out. Rachel, one of the hugely popular Twitter
tweetist.
Well, okay,
I'm
that's
not sure
a new word, but thank you.
Is,
I couldn't think of the word there. She put a poll up. Do you support Theresa May committing to bombing Syria? Please retweet for the widest possible audience. She's had 55,000 votes so far in this poll, and 84% so far absolutely saying that Theresa May is not supported in any action against Syria. So it's a pretty clear situation. This is more people than most of the polling, the official polls would be using.
And isn't this wonderful, Mike? Because it shows that when common sense is allowed to do its thing amongst ordinary people, we include ourselves in that, the common sense decision comes out.
Absolutely. And Charles Shoebridge here pointing out that a BBC journalist perhaps gave away a little bit too much and then had to take their tweet down. So Charles Shoebridge saying, yesterday a BBC journalist posted a rare admission that Syria rebels and activists are manipulating photos of dead Duma children for Western media propaganda purposes. Today the BBC journalist has deleted his tweet, but for the record a screenshot of it is here. And here we go. The BBC journalist said, sick and tired of activists and rebels using corpses of dead children to stage emotive scenes for Western consumption. Then they wonder why some serious journals are questioning part of the narrative.
Yeah.
This is hugely significant that anybody from the BBC would tweet this out. I appreciate it's been taken down since, but...
I think cracks are appearing in the system quite quickly, Mike, which is all encouraging. Have we got David back online with us? Let's just check audio.
I believe not, David. No, I'm sorry, we don't.
Okay, so a little bit of censorship from north of the border there. Let's get on to the way that the media is treating Syria. We've got to focus in on the BBC, of course, because most of the propaganda is coming out of the BBC. Here's the headline: Cabinet agrees need for action in Syria. And my key point here is back on this supposition is being put forward as fact. Now, you've already used the words. Ministers at the cabinet meeting said it was highly likely that the Assad regime was responsible for a suspected chemical attack. Highly likely suspected. So no evidence whatsoever. And yet at the moment we have this despicable woman, Theresa May, trying to take UK and the US to war over no fact. Mrs. May has said all the indications are that the Syrian regime of President Bashar al-Assad, which denies mounting a chemical attack, was responsible. All the indications, but of course no evidence whatsoever. And I'm just going to add that the UK column believes it's highly likely that the UK government is lying. So we'll add that into the mix as well. Highly likely is the key thing, because that means that the UK government is lying.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we also had a look through some of the journalists and what sort of things they've been saying. This is Laura Kuenssberg, political editor of the BBC. Had a little troll, am I allowed to say that, through her Twitter page to see what she'd been tweeting, and was just fascinated with this one here, because the gentleman says, when will the BBC become that trusted news source again, instead of, well, I don't know what it is anymore. Any soldier who had the slightest training in nuclear, biological, chemical warfare knows there are holes in this story that are as big as the protection the people in the video wear.
Yes.
So again, we've got more of the public challenging these people for what they're writing, and this is exactly the right thing to do. But here we are with the Daily Mail, and I've got to say I found this the most obscene front page I think I have ever seen on the Daily Mail. To see Cliff praying on the left, that is a whole story which we're going to have a look at in detail. I'm not sure what God he's praying to, but I don't think it's the Christian God. But that's juxtaposed missiles at the ready. So what's the Daily Mail been doing? Well, here we are. The wording is the same. Ministers at a cabinet meeting said it was highly likely that Assad's regime was behind last weekend's chemical attack. So this is just drilled through all the media outlets. It doesn't matter where you go. US officials said they'd obtained urine and blood samples from victims of the chemical attack and confirmed the presence of chlorine and a nerve agent. What they don't give is the provenance of those samples, who provided those samples, how can we be sure that they were actually taken from the so-called scene of the crime, and they don't say what the nerve agent is. So this is exactly what's happened with OPCW over Salisbury and the so-called Novichok, that the details have not been made public once again. Ministers agreed with the Prime Minister that the Assad regime has a track record of the use of chemical weapons, and it is highly likely that the regime is responsible. It's just repeated over and over again. But in comes Macron, and he said, we have proof that last week chemical weapons were used, at least with chlorine, and they were used by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. So in this case, there's no mention of nerve agent. Okay. So now we know that the French don't agree with the Americans. So this is a complete fantasy, but we have Theresa May trying to take the country to war. And inside the Daily Mail, I found this very significant. We've got a picture of an American sailor who's part of the task group, including the American carrier, which is now on its way to the Mediterranean. He's here cuddling his wife before leaving. And this is something we must never forget. Theresa May is pumping up war in Syria, but of course, ultimately, it's going to be US servicemen and women that are ultimately going to pay the price, because it will be overwhelmingly a military forces from the Americans that are committed. So this despicable British Prime Minister is is ramping up the rhetoric for war, knowing that ultimately it's going to be the United States that takes the bulk of the casualties. It's really unpleasant stuff when you get into this and analyse it. Let's have another look at a journalist here, because this is the key lady from the Daily Mail. This is Larissa Brown. She was one of the journalists who produced the story, but on her Twitter page, she's loving it, because she's got a fantastic cartoon here of all the military forces that are going to be brought into play. And if you have a look at her, she's top left, she's sat in a helicopter. I think this might be out in Afghanistan. She's busy giggling, and I think the key bit is here that basically she regards the whole theatre of Syria as a little bit of a giggle. This is the double page spread inside the Mail, and you can see this cartoon showing effectively who's got what. If I blow it up on screen, it becomes more laughable, because apparently we're sending a Type 45 to the Mediterranean, Mike, which is going to guard Cyprus.
Sorry, remind me, a Type 45, that's a frigate or a destroyer?
That's a destroyer.
Right, so that's bigger.
It's bigger. It's about £1 billion worth of warship. Doesn't work very well in warm water, which can be tricky in the Mediterranean,
yes,
although we're early in the year.
But how long is a destroyer going to last?
I would say on its own, not long. But of course, this is the reality. Theresa May and the Conservatives decimated the British military. They're now saying we are going to attack Syria. Well, of course, that's not the reality. The reality is she has to wait for the Americans to appear, and then it will be the Americans who are going to take the casualties. And look at the Sun. Here's the Sun headline. On the warpath, Theresa May vows to hit Assad over chemical attack soon as she reveals the West now has proof he was behind the atrocity. So you'd imagine reading this article, Mike, you would find some proof. There it is. It's the headline. When you get into the little video, what does she say? All the indications are the Syrian regime was responsible. And in the article itself, in that video itself, no evidence, no proof whatsoever in Theresa May's statement. So it's a joke, and it goes on, but it gets serious, because of course here is the Russians saying, well, if you're going to attack and you're going to kill Russians, we are going to fight. So here's the little club at the moment. They don't agree on the evidence. Well, of course they don't, because the evidence is not real. Look at what's said in the paper. We're back to, what's in the BBC article. We're back to a suspected chemical attack, and chemical weapon attacks are suspected to have taken place in Syria before. So this is all back to supposition. And then we've got retired generals. I find this obscene, is the correct one. He says that we can attack Syria, but if the Syrians or its ally Russia down the missiles and then target where those missiles have come from, that's an act of war. Yep. So Guardian here, I said a glimpse into the Guardian mind. A war with Russia equals a glass of wine. So this man is tweeting out that we've got World War III on its way, but don't bother your little heads with that. There's a thing which says if you drink, it's going to take 30 minutes off your life. Luckily, the public is seeing this, so here's some more of these excellent responses from the public. When your enemy is nearly defeated and final victory is at hand, gas your own people so that nations greater than yours will intervene and destroy you. And that was Sun Tzu, but of course he didn't say that at all.
No.
Here we've got Assad saying, well, you see, I was winning the war against ISIS and al-Nusra, but then I decided to order an illogical chemical attack to turn the whole world against me because everything was just going too well for me. Yeah. Nice bit of cynicism there. And this one here, which has got Putin as well, says the Syrian army is winning the battle against terrorists. You have surrounded the last town, have overwhelming military force, and are negotiating surrender. What's next? Assad, launch a chemical attack of no tactical significance to provoke international outrage and military intervention against me. I don't know who put these images together, but I'd like to say thank you very much, because they really tell the story so succinctly.
So, David, looks like you're there and functioning. So, what do you make of all this? And let's come back to this question I asked at the very beginning. There is a certain, total hypocrisy in Theresa May's position here, as she tries to use parliamentary sovereignty to provide the veneer of democracy in this country, while using the royal prerogative when it suits her, when she knows that she doesn't have the support from the people or from Parliament.
Yes, it's a complete pretense of representing the people in some way. There is no support for this course of action in the public. There's nobody. Well, it's not that nobody believes it. The press are pushing this line very hard. The nasty Russians, the nasty Syrians. Don't listen to Vanessa Beeley. Trust the white helmets. It'll all be fine. And then this is being stoked up into war, and there's clearly an agenda behind the scenes. There's clearly an agenda which has been run by by some sort of elite, visible or otherwise, and it's very much against the interests of our people, of the Syrian people, and of human thriving in general. It's reckless in the extreme. There's no support. So how do you push this through? Well, we're playing games with what sovereignty means, and we're playing games with parliamentary rules. But this can't be sustained. Surely not. This country will not stand for this.
Well, that's what we can hope, David. Now, in the meantime, let's have a look at what China's up to, because they have pushed out this little video of President Xi meeting the Chinese Navy in the South China Sea. 10,000 People's Liberation Army airmen, Marines and sailors on 48 naval vessels. Do we have 48 naval vessels left?
No, we don't.
No. And 76 aircraft for a major show of force is how they're describing it. Just have a look at what they've got here. They're calling this a parade. It was held after a 3-day exercise in the South China Sea, and it all looks very impressive, because they do have an aircraft carrier, which, okay, they bought it from Ukraine and they refurbished it, but it is bigger than the Queen Elizabeth, which is our flagship, Brian.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and it's working and operational. And, there's a picture, I think. Yes, there is the picture. And, of course, they have a whole swathe of nuclear submarines. You saw pictures of that a second ago. But in the meantime, China has sent some naval vessels into the Mediterranean in support of Russia, according to various mainstream media, in case France, the UK and the US get together to support Assad. So where does that leave us, Brian, if we're in the Mediterranean, if the Chinese are in the Mediterranean supporting Russia? This is building the whole time, Mike, isn't it? And of course, it only requires an engagement between the Americans and Russians, or the Americans and Chinese, and it escalates. This is why in the Cold War there was a constant red telephone line established between London and Washington and Moscow, that these sorts of situations could be deconflicted. And I know that on at least 2 occasions things got immensely dangerous, and they were only sorted out by dialogue. Now we've got an American president who thinks he can conduct foreign policy by tweeting, and we've got a British Prime Minister who thinks she can conduct foreign policy on the back of no evidence and what appears to be propaganda and lies. So this is very, very dangerous stuff. Now, one member of the cabinet that was taking part in that cabinet meeting yesterday was Joe Johnson, Boris Johnson's brother, and he was on BBC Question Time last night when this happened.
Are you talking about action agreed with the United States and France?
Yeah, what's been agreed in cabinet today is that the government, led by the Prime Minister, should continue to work closely should continue to work closely with, this is technology interfering, should continue to work closely with France.
So, David, that was technology interfering, apparently. What appears to have happened is that whatever connection there is between the little earpiece in his ear and the communication device in his pocket seemed to break down in some way, and instead of him hearing it in his ear, everybody heard it through the speaker and through his microphone. So it looks like the puppet has been exposed there.
It certainly does. I mean, this is well, that would make him the emu, wouldn't it? I mean, it's incredible. This has been worked from the back. I'm astounded by that. I mean, I knew that there was people setting the agenda, but every word.
Yes. David, I think this is it. Every word has to be controlled because they are telling lies, and if they don't control what each and any member of the team says, then the truth is going to get out there. This is the difference between the truth and lies. And I find it fascinating that when you watch President Putin and members of his staff talk, they are talking without any form of script in front of them. They're talking as normal individuals from their own knowledge and intellect. The difference is astounding.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Well, this comes across really strongly, that Putin is talking about a reality that's recognizable. It's rational. There is calculation there that's based on real world conditions. And we come to our politicians, and it's la la land. It's a pretend world where a whole lot of impossible things are believed. They're believed, and they're believed without question. And then in that false world, there's then a kind of strange otherworldly logic that then takes over to some strange conclusion. And there's nothing sound in it at all. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, someone who grew up sort of during the Cold War, when the Russians lied and our lot more or less told the truth, it's a remarkable turnaround.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just a quick slide here of UK column reporting on Theresa May. This was back in our front page back in 2014. We said treason, as in Theresa May, treason softly spoken. And what were we doing? We were warning that Theresa May was building a fascist state as Home Secretary. We've warned and warned. That is still the case. But of course, this immensely dangerous woman is now British Prime Minister.
Now, quite a number of people have been in touch to ask what's going on with 21st Century Wire, because Patrick Henningson's website has effectively been unavailable for the last 3 days or so. And the simple fact is that 21st Century Wire is experiencing an absolutely horrendous denial of service, distributed denial of service attack. They're receiving about 500,000 network connections an hour. They have moved the site to a different host, and the problem has followed them. Nobody seems to be able to solve it immediately. And so a little bit of patience is required while they get this sorted out. It is an unprecedented as far as, he has experienced this type of attack before, but the level of this is unprecedented. And of course, 21st Century Wire is the website which carries the vast majority of White Helmets related material, because Vanessa Beeley is the person who's been pushing or has been writing about this for so long. So that's where they've gone. In the meantime, if you want to stay in touch with what 21st Century Wire is doing, of course, they have a Facebook page, Patrick Henningson's Facebook page as well, but also 21wire.tv. Patrick is going to start posting updates on there, and keep an eye on those sources for information about how this situation resolves itself over the next couple of days. But we have not seen the level of attack. And certainly the other mainstream or the other alternative media websites, Syria-related websites that have had problems in the past week, haven't had the level of attack the 21st Century Wire has.
Yeah.
Right. Quick advertisement for Media on Trial once again. And if we haven't said enough to demonstrate that the media should be on trial so far in this programme, then we're going to have to try harder, but certainly there's going to be plenty more evidence presented at this event. Details on mediaontrial.uk. The event takes place in Leeds on the 27th of May. Do get along to that if you possibly can. Speaking to Ian Crane last night, AV9, all the rooms are now sold, and day tickets are now available for AV9. So that's from Friday the 4th to the 7th of May in the Horwood House Hotel near Milton Keynes. Too late for residential tickets, but day tickets are available. Do get one and come along if you possibly can. And David, the next Fresh Start Foundation event.
Yes, we're in Inverness. We're in the Hilton Community Centre in Inverness on Saturday, and that's at 11 a.m. until 3. Shirley P. Cooper is our keynote speaker, and we are looking forward to it immensely. There's been a huge amount of discussion regarding Fresh Start Foundation around about both the survivor community and in some Police Scotland ranks, we understand. And we're attracting a lot of attention, a lot of attacks, but that means, like Patrick Henningson's website, you're over the target. So the discussions continue. We're really looking forward to the meeting in Inverness, and I'll report back next week.
Okay.
Excellent. We'll also put out a reminder for May the 12th, Saturday, May the 12th, which is the UK column NHS and Health event. This is going to be a very, very special occasion because there has never been a major conference talking about what is really happening in the inside the NHS and with health, and a very exciting lineup of speakers. So visit UK column and you can get your tickets there. Please help us promulgate this because it is such an important event. And we're also going to say that the new Chartist movement is meeting in Manchester. That's this coming Saturday, start at 6:30 p.m. 19th, that's Saturday, should be, yeah. I think so. And the importance of this is it's about doing things. So if you're somebody that's now seeing what's happening in the country and you're thinking, my goodness, how on earth do we stop this? How do we deal with it? Then the New Chartist movement absolutely concentrating on what people should be doing, what they can do, and how to do it. And of course, everything done with perfectly lawful means and in peaceful way.
We'll just clarify that the 19th is, this is the 13th, so the 19th isn't Saturday. I think it's Thursday next week.
Well picked up, Mike. Sorry, yeah.
But it is on the 19th. Now, yes. Let's move on to the Office for Northamptonshire Police and Crime Commissioner. Now, we've been talking about Big Society for quite a long time now. And the merging of services, the merging of institutions. This is another example of it. This is a Police and Crime Commissioner for Northamptonshire, Stephen Mould. He proposed to take responsibility for the Fire and Rescue Service. That has now been approved by Amber Rudd, making an important step, they say, in the government's drive to see police and fire collaborate further and faster to benefit their local communities. So we're going to label this now because this is now Office for Northamptonshire Police, Crime and Fire Commissioner. This is through the Policing and Crime Act 2017. They've introduced, the government that is, has introduced a range of measures to drive greater collaboration between all emergency services, enabling services to share best practice and become more efficient and effective. So it all sounds very good, Brian, but it is part of this merger, this fusion doctrine, absolutely. And so just wanted to highlight that briefly. Now let's move on to Scottish issues and a health service issue. David, NHS Tayside crisis, just give us the background to this. The headline is Chairman Professor John Connell asked to resign, but what's going on here?
Well, there was a funding gap, you'll be astounded to hear, and there was some ring-fenced funds which had been gathered charitably, and this was being used for such things as children's toys, family rooms, and other sort of additional provisions for the people using the service. Well, there was a decision made to rescind the constitution of NHS Tayside, to allow that money to be, quote, retrospectively applied to the programmes of work, namely a large IT programme. And apparently there was £2.71 million were reallocated retrospectively from charitable sources into filling a gap in the IT budget. So
that's a pretty staggering situation. Has the Scottish Government made any comment about this?
Well, the Scottish Government, after this came, the best newspaper in Scotland is increasingly becoming the Dundee Courier. After the Courier broke this story, the Scottish Government had to respond. So they, Shona Robertson, who is Nicola Sturgeon's best friend and the Health Secretary, decided very bravely to ask Professor John McConnell, the head of NHS Tayside, who joined NHS Tayside and adopted that post 18 months after this decision was made, to fall on his sword and resign. So that's all sorted.
Oh, that's all it takes then, is it?
Well, they've now decided to give the money back. So that's a start. So they're putting the money back into the charitable budget. And there will be, no doubt, some sort of bridging loan from central government to see them over the hump. And that'll be us, presumably, until late next year, where the money will once again be tight as we run to the end of the April to April budgetary period, I would imagine.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Now, sticking with the Courier for a second, the headline is "Thousands Named on Secretive Council Watch Lists," and some records go back more than 40 years. This seems like a pretty staggering situation, and I'd be interested to know where these, I mean, I'm not suggesting you know the answer off the top of your head, but I'd be interested to know where these so-called watch lists go when the new EU data protection legislation comes into effect in May. And we've already heard, of course, that legislation will stay in force after Brexit. Another example of how we're not leaving.
Well, yes, this will be interesting. 2,700 local people in Tayside, Angus and Perthshire are on these lists, local authority lists of people judged to be a danger. So any council officials who are interacting with these people will be warned that these people are dangerous. And the Courier notes here, however, in hundreds of cases, no reason for inclusion or indication of how long the inclusion lasted was on file. Some of these records go back more than 40 years. So people have been targeted or identified by the council as being a danger to their staff for some 40 years. In Dundee, we've got 531 residents, 166 are high risk, 1,129 in Perth and Kinross. And Angus initially said they didn't have any such list and then admitted there was 1,020 residents on it. So is this nationwide, this policy? Does every council have this list? And the queries are, of course, are the people on the list informed? Do they have means of appeal? Do they have means of facing their accusers? Is there any form of natural justice going on here? How do you get off the list? How long are you on it for? Why are people put on it? Is being, shall we say, maybe targeted by a council official in some unjust way and complaining about it? Would that get you on the list? What sort of checks and balances? Now, what it seems is that the council, someone decides in the council that you're going on this list. Their line manager has a thorough investigation and decides whether you're on the list or not. We can imagine how that goes. And then the line manager decides. So in terms of getting names on the list like this, doesn't seem to be many checks and balances at all.
David, I will say to you that this is countrywide. There's no question of it. And local authorities have been doing this right the way across the country, England and Wales as well. And what, of course, a number of people in our chat room today have pointed out is that a threat to the council, yes, that could be somebody who's physically threatening. But, of course, anybody who challenges the council with evidence of fraud, corruption, child abuse is a threat to the council. And that type of person will almost certainly be put on one of these lists. Vexatious is a word that's used very often to brand people. And we put up the headline of Theresa May from the UK column front page back in 2014. In that article, we were specifically warning about Theresa May bringing this sort of list together with the MAPA system, the multi-agency public protection arrangement, and this was the real start of the Stasi state. So very, very dangerous. You're on a list, you don't know you're on a list, but you're branded throughout a number of different agencies as being maybe a dangerous person. They may consider you to be mentally ill. All you've actually done is taken evidence to the council of child abuse, for example.
David, the difficult thing here is, of course, we know the lists exist, and if you have suspicion that you're on a list, the simple thing to do would be to send in a subject access request, which is data protection legislation is supposed to guarantee that you get back all the information that a particular institution holds on you. But of course, if you don't know that you're on the list and that subject access request comes back and doesn't seem to show that you are, it must be very hard to discover whether you actually are or not, unless there's somebody on the inside prepared to go and look for you, I suppose.
Yes, I mean, how secret are these lists? Will it be revealed under subject access requests? We're seeing more and more cases where the information that's coming out by this route is less than complete, often heavily redacted, and it's by no means clear that this would be revealed by a council.
Yes. Now, the Scottish Sun, this is a couple of weeks ago now, but we've had Easter holidays and so on in between, and so you haven't been on the programme for a couple of weeks. So the Scottish Sun has decided to have a go at the Dohertys.
Yes, a very telling little article here, and it seems to have been written, it was broken by the Scottish Sun. It seems to have been written by Lucy Sampson, a Sun journalist. I had a little look at her background. She has got a huge pedigree in journalism that goes all the way back to February 2018. And this is one of the 7 articles that she has written in her career. So they've got someone who's extremely green. And the same article was picked up word for word in the Press and Journal, only that was on a different byline. That was by David Proctor, but every word was the same. So it's not clear who actually wrote this. Now, it's a very interesting attack piece on Brian Doherty, because what they do is there's been a General Teaching Council meeting. Now, Brian Doherty's obviously dropped off the radar. He's not reporting for work, and he's not been working for some years. So you would think it would be quite a normal thing maybe for him to be removed from the register. But there's a lot of fairly salacious information come from a deputy head teacher in his former school in Fraserburgh. And it's all reported in the papers. It's a very strange thing to report on. It's a very strange thing to report on 2 papers, 2 bylines, and exactly the same words. And the description from Pauline Buchan here is that she felt threatened. She felt he was a dangerous man. He was obsessed. So it seems to be speaking to an agenda which has got very little to do with the General Teaching Council.
David, I don't know if you've got thoughts on this. I mean, obviously, this is a story that we covered extensively up to the point that the Dohertys themselves decided that they no longer wanted to pursue this in a public way, and they asked us to remove the content from the UK Column website, a request that we respected at the time. Why, months after that, when they've effectively disappeared off the radar, why has the mainstream media decided to run a hit piece like this at this time?
It's bizarre. I really don't know. It's very much a hit piece. It's irrelevant to anything that's really being considered by the General Teaching Council. And why now? I have no idea why now. There may be something happening in the background that we don't see. I would have to say that all the investigation that we managed to do showed that substantiated what the Dohertys were saying to us, and where we found them to be in error, it was only where they didn't know the full extent of the story, and the reality appeared to be worse. So, our position remains that the core of that story we believe to be accurate, and of course none of that's been discussed. None of the issues relating to the disappearance have been discussed. Simply repeated descriptions of Brian being distressed and this deputy headmistress being afraid, and it's crafted to paint him as an unreliable source. It seems to me it's for a different agenda, but what that is, not clear to us.
Don't know yet. Yeah. Okay, David. Look, we're pretty much out of time, so we'll just leave it with this story.
Pete Wishart came within 21 votes of losing his seat. He had a very safe seat, and the the continued and unrelenting agitation for further independence referenda until we vote the way we're meant to vote had sufficiently annoyed his constituents that he was very close to being out of a job. He, despite being one of the sort of leading cheerleaders for maybe the less pleasant side of Scottish nationalism, has turned around and said, no, we're not making any sense here. Continued talk about an independence referendum between now and 2021. Sorry about the Airedale in the background. Is irrational, and we should basically park this until later. He's been astounded by the amount of attacking he's been receiving, particularly on the internet and Twitter, from his allies, from the group called the Cybernauts, who have called him an Etonian bootlicker, as you see here. And yes, he's had to endure the nature of the problem that those of us who have asked questions about the Scottish independence movement for years have had to endure all the time.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it's brilliant, isn't it? We couldn't hear you at the beginning of the programme, but we hear you and the doggy at the end of the programme, which is just excellent.
Would you like to meet Bert? Come on, Bert. No, Bert wants out. Bert needs out the door. So I think Bert's got something pressing on his mind.
That's fine. It's a pleasure to hear the dog. It's very un-BBC, which means it's really excellent. I wonder whether they might be delaying the Indy ref because will Scotland still be there if it flares up with the Russians in the Mediterranean? Possibly not.
Oh, look, Faslane is not far from Glasgow, so that's not entirely a frivolous comment. And well, I mean, the whole issue about independence and Europe is independence within Europe, which is meaningless. So the whole policy has been in disarray for some time, and there's very few, Jim Sills and one or two others, who are willing to talk about this.
Okay, the dog needs out. Okay, there we are. That is UK column news today. My goodness, it's getting more and more difficult to report United Kingdom news. It is so outrageous and bizarre. Can we do something about this appalling potential attack on Syria? Yes, we can. Remember, it was public opinion that swayed things last time. So if you feel as outraged about what's happening as we do, then get on to your MP, get on the phones, get writing letters, get emailing, get tweeting, and hold these people to account. Is Theresa May capable of kicking off World War III? I personally believe she is. Is she capable of building a police state in UK? It's nearly here, but we can stop it, but only if we take action. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.